Hello, welcome to the very first episode of Under the Birch Tree. This is a podcast that I've been wanting to make for a very long time, about my creative endeavours. I'm primarily a knitter, but I also crochet, and my plans once I finish my study is to create my own wardrobe, to sew my own wardrobe. I have knitted some clothes in the past, but I've never had a great deal of success with them, and I will talk about that in more depth in another podcast. I live in the southwest of England with my 4 children and my husband. My husband and my youngest daughter have helped me enormously with getting to the point where I can record my first podcast. I'm trying very hard not to say what all new podcasters say, which is that this is very nerve-wracking and very strange, staring at a camera instead of at myself on the camera. However, I'm going to persevere and I'm going to get it right. So I'll tell you first of all a little bit about my journey with knitting. My grandma taught me as a child, and my mum also helped to teach me. But I don't remember a lot about it. I just know that I've always been able to knit. And then when I had my first daughter, 17 years ago tomorrow, I made her a cardigan, which was an Erica Knight pattern. And if I've got any photos I can find of her wearing it, I shall put them on the screen. Apologies if I didn't manage to do that. It was a very simple garden knit cardigan, probably not made out of anything particularly special. I don't remember anything else I made for them, but I expect my mum, who is my yarn sponsor extraordinaire, can. But I definitely made my children a jumper. I say my children because it was made for my first, and of course they all wore it. That was navy blue and pink and purple stripes, with a roll neck. I can't remember what pattern it was, but they loved it. They wore that a lot. And then apart from that, I didn't finish any patterns. I wouldn't finish projects. Not much of a finisher. So that was frustrating to me. And then some years ago, I cannot remember how many years ago, I just made the decision I'm just going to start making small items and completing them. I can't remember at all what the first thing was that I made and completed, but I did it, and then I kept on doing it until I got to the point where I was making quite large items, which was really exciting. I'm not a monogamous knitter by any stretch, excuse me, but I do tend to, in the past I've been a sort of monogamous to a type of project. So I went through a phase of mostly knitting socks, and then I went through a phase of mostly crocheting blankets. And part of that was inspired by whatever I was seeing on Ravelry or on the internet, and sometimes it was what my friends were doing. So now though, at the moment, in the last few months, I've really kind of expanded my knitting, because I've developed this ambition to create my own wardrobe, partly inspired by other podcasters I've watched. And although I can sew, and I have sewn large items before, I have never been successful really in making myself any wearable clothes, sewing myself any wearable clothes. So it feels like quite a big project to undertake, learning how to do that properly. And I can't really afford to invest the time in that at the moment, because I am completing my studies at the moment, and I also work full time. I'm not on furlough, so I really am working full time, and studying and having 4 children. Happily, I have the most wonderful husband in the world, who is a stay-at-home parent. So because I can't get on with my dream of sewing my own wardrobe at the moment, I thought to myself, right, I'm just going to learn to knit myself clothes. And then I can start building my handmade wardrobe, even if it's not sewn at this point. So that's expanded my knitting repertoire a bit, but I do get bored easily, and I like to have lots of different sorts of knitting on the needles. So I do have socks on the go at the same time as a shawl, and at the moment at the same time as a sweater, and I like to have something that's TV knitting at the same time as having something that's a bit more complicated. So I've tried to work out the best things to show. If I showed you every project I was working on at the moment, this podcast would be very, very long. But I'm going to try and hone it down a little bit. So this podcast, I want to kind of, at the moment, I'm thinking have a bit of a chronology. So I would like to talk about something I've made in the past, what I've learned from it, how it changed my knitting, so that I can also record my evolution with my knitting. And then I'd also like to show you something I've completed recently, something I'm working on now, maybe a few things I'm working on now, and what my plan is, what's going to be the next cast on. I do have a long Ravelry queue and yarn ready and waiting for all of those things, but I will always have one or two things that will be the next cast on. So I will be showing those things. If I'm working on any crochet, I will show you that. And then long term, I really want to record my progress with sewing my own wardrobe. So first of all, let's talk about a past project that I made. So this is my Quicksilver Shawl, which is a design by Melanie Berg. Here it is. This is quite handy because it's got a mesh. I can see what you can see on the camera through the mesh. So it's a really, really nice shawl to wear. It's probably the first thing that I made that I really, really loved and really felt like I'd made it as a knitter of beautiful things, made with beautiful yarn. I'll put it on. I hope it doesn't knock the microphone. This is how I tend to wear it. There we are. Sit up a bit. So it's just untangle myself. I've got my notes here so I can tell you what it's made with. So this is made with yarn that I bought at Wonderwall a few years ago, or rather my wonderful yarn sponsor, my mum bought me. I realised I wasn't looking at the camera again, sorry. The greeny blue colour that the mesh is. I don't know if this has got an automatic zoom on my phone, but automatic focus, sorry. Anyway, the greeny blue is merino silk yak blend, and then the pale pink in the stripes is merino silk, and the dark pink is a superwash merino. It's a really clever pattern. It looks like it uses a bit of short row shaping, but I can't remember if it does, I'm afraid. But I really love this. I've worn it a lot and I continue to wear it. I love this shape of shawl, this kind of asymmetric triangle. And I love the colours in this. I really love the colours. And I think this shawl really was the one that showed me that what you can do with colour. I think up until now I'd just been quite careful with colour. And when I chose the wool for this shawl and when I made it up, I realised quite what amazing things you can do with the right colours and what exciting things you can do with them. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about was mixing yarn bases. I know there are certain unspoken rules in knitting. I'm not a fan of rules anywhere. And I get that sometimes you will create a better object if you know the rules before you break them. I didn't know the rules about not mixing yarn bases, and I'm really glad that I didn't know the rules. Every time I do a little bit of side-eye, I know it's because I'm looking at my picture, not the camera. So I apologise for that. It's what I found when you make a shawl that's got different patterns in it, as well as different colours, is that it doesn't actually matter as much as some people think if you mix the yarn bases. In fact, you can get a more interesting item out of it. Now I've got another shawl that I'll show another time that I made that's got two very different yarn bases, and it's a really exciting shawl. So although I had no idea about not mixing yarn bases with this, and Mum at Wonderwall got told in no uncertain terms that she should not mix yarn bases with a pattern, which was a bit frustrating. It's worked really well with this, and I think it will work with a lot of patterns. I do think it's worth understanding the rules and why they might be in place before you break them. I didn't understand the rules and I got lucky. But I definitely think the rule about not mixing yarn bases is not a good one, because it can be fun. It does depend on what you're making and what you're looking for. If you're looking to do colour work, I can see you really need the yarn bases to be the same. If you're making something where the drape will be dramatically changed by the different yarns, then you need to consider something different. But it could work to really good effect. And I find that with a shawl like this, and like the other one that I will show you some other time, the drape in this one's actually not that much affected by the different bases. But even when it is, it just makes it a more structurally interesting finished object. It really does. So that's my Quicksilver by Melanie Berg, and I've got a lovely photo on my Ravelry project page of my youngest daughter wearing it when I made it a few years ago. My youngest daughter Maya, who's helped me enormously with getting this podcast up and running. So the next thing to talk about is my latest finished objects. Now I've got two, one of which I can show you and one of which I can't because it's been gifted already. So the first one I will talk about is very quickly is my Spring into Summer shawl, which is a design by Mina Phillips of the Knitting Expat. Now this shawl at the Southern Wool Show last year, I bought a little pack of minis, a gradient pack of minis. I'll try and put a photo up here as well, from the Skein Queen. And they were just delicious, and I was very excited and I had lots of plans, and then I could not find a pattern for them. And I realised that all these beautiful patterns that are on Ravelry at the moment for gradient mini gradient sets, they all seem to be inspired by, I'm going to say the wrong person now, I think it's Miss Babs, which is a yarn company in America, and her mini skeins are all 25 grams. Now all the mini skeins that I can find in the UK are all 5 20-gram skeins to make up 100 grams. And so it's really difficult to find patterns that work for that. So it took me forever to find the pattern I wanted to make. I knew I wanted to make a gradient yarn pattern, and I think that the one I'd taken to Ravelry with me that I was buying for, I had one, but it was for a 6 skein set, 25 grams each, not a 5 skein set. So eventually I found the Spring into Summer shawl by Mina Phillips, which is a lovely pattern, and hopefully there's a picture coming up now of my finished object. After finding the shawl, I then lost the will to live nearly, trying to find the colour that I wanted to go with it. I had wanted a silvery grey colour that my mum had in her stash and she had given to me, which was another Skein Queen yarn, but it turned out I'd used it with another shawl, so I couldn't. And then there were no yarn shows to be going to for some time because of coronavirus. So I was a bit concerned about buying something online to go with something I already had. But then Mum dug out some Malabrigo yarn. I think it's Malabrigo yarn sock. It was a merino one and it was in eggplant colour. And as you can see from the shawl, it's not really that eggplanty. It's more of a dark grey. But it is lovely and I'm really, really pleased with how it turned out. The only issue I had with the pattern was, although I had plenty of yardage for the size set in the sample, which was the one that I wanted, it turned out at the end I didn't have plenty of large yardage for it at all. And you can, I don't know if you can see, but the last set of stripes is much narrower than it should have been. I wonder if you can hear our chickens being noisy outside. Yeah, so I did kind of run out of the greens. Still had plenty of the Malabrigo, but not much of the little squashes. So I was disappointed at first, but in the end, it's turned out fine. I'm really, really pleased with it. So I've gifted it the other day to my friend at a 2 metre distance. I had to leave it in a certain place. I wrapped it in a bag, wrapped it up, put it in a bag for 72 hours, and then brought her the bag and left it for her to pick up and said, "Don't touch the bag, take the parcel out." Anyway, she loved it after it had been quarantined. So I'm very, I was really pleased with that shawl. So that's my first finished object. My second one is a pair of socks, and this is the first pair of socks I've made for many years. And these are they. And these are Exceedingly Vanilla Socks by Amanda Steck. They're with Wendy Roan yarn that was gifted to me by my mother-in-law a few years ago. It uses it's a Eye of Partridge heel, flap heel. I wish the autofocus was working. I'm really sorry that it isn't. It's probably something I need to work on. And I wanted to make vanilla socks, even though I've made lots of socks before, because I wanted to try using 9-inch circulars, which I saw on one of the podcasts I'm most inspired by, which is Fibre Tales by Lerka. She had them, I think, from Maria of Ninja Chickens, who didn't get on with them, but Lerka's really got on with them, and I was really inspired because I used to knit socks on DPNs, and I could not, whatever I did, I could not lose that ladder up the sides, and that was really frustrating to me. So when I thought I was going to start knitting socks again, I thought I would get some circular needles to do a magic loop with. I've done a lot of magic loop knitting with sleeves and things. So that had been my plan. And then when I started looking at my other thing that I want to learn, which is colour work, I realised that magic loop wasn't working for me when I did that with some hats and things. So I thought, oh, why not try these 9-inch circulars? So I thought I'll try a vanilla sock pattern so I can practice with the 9-inch circulars. And I'm quite pleased with them. I haven't made them long enough for me to wear, but I'm going to keep going with experimenting with socks and just getting some practice with thinking about the size that works best for me. These have been adopted by daughter number 3, who's called Poppy, and she really loves them. So yeah, I'm really pleased with those, but I wanted to experiment with my socks really, and think about different numbers of stitches to cast on, different lengths of foot. I knit quite tight, so the 9-inch circulars that I bought are 2.75 mil, but I might invest in a set of 9-inch circulars, so I've got different things to try, and I can knit some DK socks and things in the future. So that moves me nicely onto what I'm working on now, because one of the things I'm working on now is another pair of socks. So this is a pair of socks that I'm knitting with some leftover yarn from another project I finished quite recently, which was gifted to a friend. And this is yarn by the Knitting Swede, who I think is not trading anymore, It's called Spartan, and the colour is Nautilus, and it is it's 100% BFL. So I've got plenty of it, and I'm knitting these socks called Wood-Nymph Socks, and they've got this lovely lace pattern that goes up the left and the right hand side, both sides, until you get to the heel flap, and then it just stays going up the outside of the leg and the foot. So I'm knitting it on these 9-inch circulars, as you can see. Again, this focus issue. I will get good at getting this kind of thing working. I've done a twisted, so on these socks I just did a 2x2 rib, and on these I'm doing a 1x1 twisted rib. And the other thing I did differently was I have done a tubular cast on, which I have learned quite recently when I made a hat designed by Marina Skewer, the heeless hat, which again, new thing for me, learning the tubular cast on. I really enjoyed knitting this hat with some other leftover yarn. So when I started a sweater for my nephew recently, I decided I was going to use a tubular cast on for that, and I've done the same for these socks. Excuse that bit of hair. And then I'm using 9-inch circulars. So I might talk about these in more detail in another podcast, but I am really enjoying using them, really enjoying it. I know a lot of people say that they get a bit of RSI, but I haven't done that, maybe because I've eased myself into it. But yeah, I'll maybe talk about 9-inch circulars on another podcast. But yeah, these socks are lovely. Lovely row of leafy things going up the side. Really, really pretty. It's a free pattern, and it's really well written, so I can recommend it. So that's my socks. The next thing I've got on my needles is a shawl. Now, there's a bit of a story to this shawl. I wanted to make a shawl called Pastel Gemstones shawl, and I bought the yarn for it at Wonderwall the year before last, I think. Yeah, I don't think it was last year. I think it was, I can't remember actually. It's knit by numbers from John Arbon, because they do the most amazing colours, and they do I think 6 colours in each, 6 shades of each colour. Is that the right way around? So you can really, really be excited about it. I've got a shade card of theirs which I bought recently. So the Pastel Gemstone shawl obviously uses lots of bright colours. So I bought this bright pink colour. I wonder if I can get them all on the camera at a time. This orange. I got a little weeny blue. So this is 100 grams, 50 grams. And then I can't remember if this is 20 or 25. In the blue and the purple and the green. So I got all of those, and the pastel gem shawl just wouldn't work. It wasn't right for it. I can't remember why. It was a long time ago I tried it. I have a habit of doing this, buying yarn for a particular project and then the project not working, and then trying several other projects until I finally land on the right one. So that's what happened with these lovely colours. They look amazing together. They're really exciting and interesting, but I couldn't get the shawl that would work right with them. And then I eventually found the shawl I wanted to make, which is the Frieze shawl by Lisa Hannahs. Now, the Frieze shawl originally I think is in worsted weight, and it uses a white colour or a creamy colour and a long colour change pattern. Now, I didn't know that when I looked at the pattern. I just looked at it and thought, oh, that looks like that would work really well with my, my bright John Arbon yarns. So I bought it, and then I do my research before I buy patterns. I did see that it said, well, obviously, the thing with shawls is you can knit them in any in any weight yarn you like. If your gauge is out, all that happens is the shawl is a slightly different size or maybe a slightly different drape. So you can be a bit more creative with that kind of thing. Something I never would have done in the olden days, which is probably why I got a bit stuck with my knitting in the past. I'm a bit of a, for somebody who doesn't like rules, I'm a bit of a rule follower. So I like to have patterns that tell me exactly what to do. But I've learned to be a little bit more creative and to think differently about the patterns that I choose and the yarn I choose for it. So I knew that I could make it out of fingering weight yarn. I knew I may need to be careful about the needle size. But I also knew I needed to choose a colour to go with my bright colours. Oh, that's not the right one. I'm missing one, I think. No, this is right. So I think Mum and I ordered the shade card from John Arbon, and we had a look at it, had a look at their creams and whites and things, and we eventually found, now I don't know if I can show you all of these at once, maybe I'll line them up on here. Let's move some of these bits. There we are. There, perfect. And we found and decided on this rich creamy colour, yellowy buttermilky type colour. I didn't feel like I wanted white, and so I've started the shawl, and I am really, really pleased with it. Here we are. It's really lovely. It's mosaic knitting, so you even though you've got the different colours in each row, you actually only work one colour each row and you slip stitches. It's not stranded, you can see the back. And so I've decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit, so this pink section is 3 repeats of the pattern. This purple is 1 repeat, the orange is 2 repeats, 1 repeat, and this is 3 repeats. So I'm going to, it took me a long time to think, do I want a system? Do I want to get it spot on? Do I want a sequence, a pattern or something? And then I decided, no, I want it to be a bit random. So I'm going to, every time I'm going to plan like 5 or 6 colours worth and then plan the next 5 or 6 colours worth. So that's what I'm going to do. I think I'm going for green next. But it really is lovely. I'm sorry about the focusing, but I think you can see it well enough. It's a really, really pretty pattern. I just love it. So this is my complex knitting. So my socks are my semi-complex knitting. This pattern's not very difficult to work. And this is my current complex knitting on the go. I'm knitting it on my favourite sort of needle, which is the higher sharps. Again, it's really awful to focus. I will sort that out, ready for the next podcast. I love higher sharps. I can't remember when I discovered them, but I really, really love them. I've got lots of different length cables, and these are 4.5mm needles, and I keep them in this. Now my mum is not my only knitting sponsor. The other one is my dad, who is fab, and he has learned recently how to do leather work, so he has been making me these lovely needle holders, and I just, so the needles just go in like that, and then they're safe. I love them. Thanks, Dad. So that's my freeze shawl. That's my slightly complicated knitting. Now, I wasn't going to talk about any other projects in this podcast that I'm working on now because I had so many to talk about. But I will just briefly say that I'm also working on a couple of sweaters, a small one for a child in our family and a large one for me, and that is part of my quest to learn how to make sweaters. But that's my simple knitting, my TV knitting. Let's take these down, and I will talk about that on another podcast because I want to talk a bit about my process of learning how to knit sweaters. So the next bit of this podcast is going to be what am I knitting next? Stroke yarn acquisitions. So this isn't a recent yarn acquisition. I got this at the Southern Wool Show last year. I don't know about you all, but hi. So everything you've just seen up till now on the video was recorded yesterday, and then when I got to this point of the editing, first time editing, something had happened to the last 5 minutes or so of the video, and it was stuff that I really wanted to say, so I've added it here, re-recording it now. I was talking about being at wool shows and choosing. What I was saying was that I tend to spend the whole wool show going round, going backwards and forth, trying to find the perfect yarn combinations, and then get right to the end of the show. I've spent all my money, and then, or at least all the money that was budgeted for the show, and then just towards the end, let's just go back to such and such a store, and always find the perfect combination of yarn and get terribly excited and have to buy it. And my mum's the same, so I don't know if anyone else is, but these. And then what happens is these last minute buys, these unplanned for buys, tend to be the best buys of the whole show. So at the Southern Wool Show last year, I found these delicious skeins of yarn. These are from the Knitting Shed, also known as Ainsworth and Prynne. And these two skeins are both merino silk singles 4-ply, so 70% superwash merino and 30% silk. This colour is called Mrs. Dalloway, and this colour is called Brinjal. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And I just love them. And since this knitting show, the Southern Wool Show last year, the Knitting Shed has become one of my favourite indie dyers. I just love the colours they produce. Really, really enjoy their combinations, and I've bought quite a few more from them online since the lockdown, because we were looking forward to getting something from them at Wonderwool. Yeah, I just love these. So I am going to be making with these the Coastal Fog Shawl, which is a pattern by Callie Monster, and I'm going to be, well, where the video cuts out now is I had to pause it to go and look at the pattern, so that's going to come up next, I think. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't want to leave these beautiful things out because they are so delicious. Anyway, I'll go back to my editing now, and hopefully this will all be working out fine. Okay, so I'm back. So the it is going to be in the green. The dark colour will be this, and the lighter colour will be this. I'm not going to change them around. Sometimes I do to see what it looks like, but I'm not with this. So I'm really excited about making that shawl. I think it's going to be fun to knit. It's going to be complicated because I'm sure I will learn the patterns of the stitches really quickly. I usually do, but they'll be nice. Nice contrast. Once I finish my free shawl, I think is when I will cast that on. So I've got a little way to go before I will be casting it on. But that is my next shawl, and I'm really looking forward to making that. So I don't think there's a lot more to talk about for this podcast. I'm at 35 minutes at the moment, I can see. So one thing I would like to do is talk about another podcast that I like. I love podcasts that are of different lengths. Sometimes I really want to settle down and snuggle up for an hour, and sometimes I just want something that's quite quick, between around 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. The reason I like podcasts is I can knit some of my more complex patterns while I'm watching them, because there's no plot to keep track of, and I can pause it, rewind it if I get lost or I see something that I think, oh, look a bit more closely at that. And also, I just find them so inspiring. I get so much inspiration from watching podcasts. My inspiration to make my handmade wardrobe, which is something that's been a thing on and off my whole adult life, really. But really inspired was watching this podcast, which I'm going to tell you about now, which is the Green Bean podcast. And I was very much looking forward to hopefully meeting Katie Green at Wonderwall when it all got cancelled. However, hopefully next year. Her podcast is just lovely. It's so peaceful and slow, unlike this one, which I think will be a bit buzzy because I talk very fast. She's such a gentle soul, and her podcast really reflects that. It really is very honest to her, and I love that she sews as well as knits, and I'm not an artist at all. I cannot draw to save my life. Very bad even at playing Pictionary. But I still love watching her drawing, and her art is just wonderful. Absolutely love it. So that's my podcast recommendation. If you haven't already seen the Green Bean podcast, which I'm sure you have done, you must go and watch it. And I think that's it for this podcast. I will be very anxious about putting this up on YouTube. So I'd love, please, if you do watch it, do tell me what you think. Unless you're going to say something mean, in which case please don't tell me what you think. I am going to be very anxious about putting this up on YouTube. But hopefully some people like it. And even if they don't, I've had a really nice time, because I really love talking about knitting. I love talking about my projects, and I love talking about being creative. So I will keep doing it, and I will keep enjoying doing it. And I'm hoping to learn a lot through the process. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.